So good morning. Welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum. My name is Matt Courtney, and I'm the recorder and a member of the board of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you have not already done so. Membership forms are available on our website at humanists.org. That's humanists plural. If you're listening for the first time, welcome, and we invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events. You can find all our events listed on the website, again, humanists.org. Please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find out how to donate to our organization on the website, humanists.org. Our speaker for today's forum is Dr. Alexander Cannara, and we'll discuss clean nuclear energy. So I'm going to go ahead and allow him to unmute. So, Alex.
Hey,
there we
go.
It's all yours.
Okay, and I hope that you can see the main screen.
You're not sharing your screen yet.
Not shared yet because I turned it off, of course. Let's do this one. Okay, can everyone see the first page now? Says the future of nuclear power. Okay, good. This is actually based on a presentation we did in Maryland for the Maryland Clean Energy Center about 2 weeks ago, because they have a large nuclear power installation at Calvert Cliffs on the water, and they have space. They're looking to expand that perhaps with newer technology, nuclear. Excuse me. So let's start first with saying that actually nuclear is very clean. It's cleaner actually than most other sources of energy. So I don't really have any quibble with what we have currently. But as we'll see as I go through this, there are improvements that can be made. And in fact, as the World Bank has mentioned in the past year, the only choice we really have for meeting our climate needs is nuclear, and I'll explain why. This is the beginning. PowerPoint has some interesting behaviors. This is the interesting thing is that 2.2 billion years ago, Mother Nature had her own nuclear reactors in the mountains of Oklo, Gabon. So you can always Google OKLO, Gabon, reactors, and you'll get the story, which is a very fascinating story because it depends upon photosynthesis. The only way in which we have uranium today is rocks, mineral content. And the way uranium was freed to be able to be used in the way in which we use it was because of photosynthesis releasing oxygen into the air, and the oxygen corroded the rock metals that were common when the Earth was formed, because there was no oxygen in the air originally. And as a result, things like uranium oxide becoming soluble in water, it was able to be transported and concentrated. And so what you see in this picture in the middle is actually the core of a reactor that operated naturally in the mountains of Gabon about 2.2 billion years ago. Whenever it rained, the water came down and caused the reactions to occur. And fission occurred, the water turned to steam, and it blew the rocks apart. Everything cooled off, it rained again, cycle would repeat. So this is where nuclear power that we use today actually started naturally in 2.2 billion years ago. Then in 1926, a woman, Lisa Meitner, discovered fission of nuclear materials by analyzing very carefully the chemical contents of uranium ore in Germany. And this gave her the idea that the only way these chemicals could appear is if a heavier element had broken apart, which is fission. And that's what she wrote. She couldn't publish it because in Germany in those years, you had to be a man to be a lead publisher, lead author on an article. So her boss, Otto Hahn, had his name first, even though she made the discovery. Okay, so come down to 1962, and President Kennedy was concerned with the United States security, national security, sort of like today. And he asked a commission to tell him what should we do for energy to support the United States economy into the future, and so forth. And they came back and they said, the Seaboard Commission came back and said, nuclear power. And what you do is you take the common materials, uranium and thorium, and you make fission fuel out of them, which is easy to do, and I'll explain how to do that. And that will last pretty much forever, thousands and thousands of years. So we have so much of that material. Those materials are called fertile materials, which means that even though they can't be used as a fuel in a thermal nuclear reactor themselves, they can be turned into fuel in a relatively simple way by capture of a neutron. So if a thorium atom captures a neutron, it will decay into uranium-233, which is a wonderful fuel for a nuclear reactor. If uranium-238, which is the 99% of what the uranium that we find in rocks today is, if it captures a neutron, it turns into plutonium-239, which is also a very good fuel for a nuclear reactor. In fact, we ran about 10% of the United States electricity from nuclear reactors that were fueled with Russian plutonium and uranium weapons material after the Berlin Wall fell down. The Russians needed money, and we wanted to get rid of a whole bunch of their weapons. So we gave them $50 billion, and they gave us 17,000 Russian nuclear warheads, which we reconstituted into fuel for our commercial civilian reactors and used it up. So it's no longer a weapon. In fact, nuclear power is the only way you can actually do that. Only way that you have to fully remove weapons and material from the world. Okay, and then let's go on. Oh, by the way, the bottom of this, it's ironic. As a former member of the Sierra Club myself, the head of the Sierra Club and people like Ansel Adams and so forth said, nuclear power is the chief way to preserve the environment. For obvious reasons, which will maybe become a little more obvious as we go through this, but it's the most dense source of energy, and so it doesn't interfere with the environment very much at all. Okay, so this is one of the most important slides. Can you see my arrow as I wiggle it around?
Yes.
Okay, good. So on the center of this is the most important. So if we take a uranium atom, or it could be plutonium atom, that is fissile. In other words, if it can fission, can split apart and release energy. If we take that atom and have a neutron impact it, doesn't have to be going terribly fast or anything, it will absorb the neutron, become unhappy with its current state, and split apart. And that splitting apart typically releases two components, two atoms, that are roughly the same, similar in size, but not the same size. And as a result of that, it releases some radiation. Alpha particle is a helium nucleus, a beta particle is an electron, and a gamma is a strong X-ray-like radiation pulse. So this is energy that we can use to heat something up. The two fission products move apart from each other at a very high speed and crash into the neighboring atoms in the fuel. So that's another source of heat. So we get a lot of heat. And that's really what a nuclear reactor produces, is heat. this would be fine if we had an infinite number of these atoms that we could split. We wouldn't worry about it. But as Kennedy was told, we need to actually use the atoms that will not split so easily and convert to them into ones that will split. So we need to take the fertile atoms, hit them with a neutron, get something that if we hit that with a neutron, it'll split. That's called breeding. So you breed fuel by taking a fertile atom that won't split, give it a neutron, it now becomes a fissile atom that will split. Another neutron, it's 2 neutrons so far, and now we can split that and release the energy. Well, wonderful Mother Nature, we get some neutrons out of the splitting, which means that we can take those neutrons and put them back up here and keep the reaction going, whether or not we have a fertile or a fissile atom to start with. So this gives us the chain reaction that we need to keep generating heat from nuclear fission. And since we can make our own fissile atoms that will release heat when we split them, we have as much fuel for as many years into the future as there exist fertile atoms in the world. Every rocky body in the solar system contains uranium, thorium, so we have plenty of fertile atoms in the universe to use to make the heat from which we can derive power. So as we'll see, this heat is essentially used to make steam or heat another gas that we could use to run a device to generate energy, electricity, or other mechanical energy. Actually, if you have a question about this, you could ask it any time because we have enough time, I think, to go through that. But this is the key thing. You have to understand that we split the atom, we get these fission products, we get neutrons, we can keep the reaction going. We have fertile or fissile atoms here, it doesn't matter. We can keep doing this forever. As long as something remains that's fertile, we can keep doing this forever. Now, the reason we use nuclear power from the beginning, from Einstein's conversation with President Roosevelt, is that the amount of energy released, heat in the basic case, is 3 billion watt hours per pound. Now, that doesn't sound like it's hard to comprehend. A billion watt hours is a billion watts runs a million homes. So a million homes, so 3 million homes for an hour per pound of uranium or thorium that we have from nature. That's a huge amount of energy. Contrast that with combustion, where we burn some sort of fuel like oil or coal. It's 1 million times more dense. Actually, more than 1 million times dense, because the people who sell us the oil and coal don't sell us also the oxygen that we need to burn it. And that's an interesting thing, that the energy companies that sell us fuel that need to burn, they don't have any need to pay for the oxygen that we have to have. Otherwise, the fuel is useless. The other thing that's interesting is that fusion, should we ever have it, and I'll discuss a little bit about that, fusion is only 100 times more energy dense than fission. So it's not like we have to worry so much about working hard to get fusion running. We have plenty of these fissile and fertile atoms in the uranium family to be able to run for thousands of years the way we are now. But of course, we couldn't do it with fuels that we have to burn and obviously supply oxygen to. Okay. Here's what looks kind of scary, but there's nothing really much to it. The left side of this vertical line shows the atoms that are created through fusion. The right side shows what atoms we can use and for fission and what the energy is that we get. And the reason iron is in the middle is because iron is one of the most stable elements. Iron and nickel are the most stable elements. In other words, they're very happy. Their protons and neutrons are in the nuclei of iron and nickel, are very happy where they are. They're not at all interested in splitting apart. The other thing is that they're not all interested in being fused with other atoms. So the reason stars die, like our sun, die is because here's the energy they keep getting as they fuse things. Here's hydrogen, helium, beryllium, and so forth. As they fuse slightly heavier and heavier and heavier elements, this vertical measure of energy tapers off, and they can't get any more energy once they get to iron. No point in fusing iron because they're not going to get any more energy. They have to actually have spare energy to fuse iron atoms together. So stars die here. They stop having enough fuel to keep themselves hot and bloated up, and so they turn into what we call white dwarfs, or they explode and throw off their outer clouds of elements. So this is the fusion side of things. Here's the fission side of things, which is what we do currently in nuclear reactors. These are the weights of the elements. So the heavy elements are to the right. Hydrogen was on the left. This is the amount of energy we can get by fissioning an atom, because as we make them heavier and heavier, they are less and less stable, and they will be able to release energy if we, as I said before, let's say provide a neutron that hits the nucleus of an atom that's heavy, and it will split apart. And it will release this much energy that's been stored in them. Now, these are heavy nucleuses, have a lot of neutrons and protons in them, right? So they're very heavy elements. A ton of uranium, a hat box filled with uranium is a ton. So you could take this hat box and have a forklift, put it in the passenger seat of your car, and then the car would probably be crushed, right? This is the energy we get because there are so many neutrons and protons in the nucleus of a heavy atom that each one of them gives us some energy when it's split apart from the rest of the nucleus. And so we get what sounds like a huge amount of energy out of splitting just one uranium atom. We get 200 million electron volts. Well, it sounds impressive, but it's actually something you might not even notice if it happened in a cell in your body, for instance. An electron volt is an extremely small amount of energy. But nonetheless, this is a lot of energy when you add up how many atoms there are in a pound of material. So this is where the energy from nuclear fission comes from. And when we split the atom, this heavy atom, we split it, we move back here to lighter atoms. We have two of them because we split the heavy atom. So we have two of them that were somewhere in here. And so we've gained this much energy in relation to the curve. And this just simply illustrates the two resulting fission product atoms when you split uranium atom or plutonium atom. And you'll notice, depending upon what we split, we pretty much get the same distribution. This is uranium-235, plutonium-239, so forth. We get about the same, but it's interesting that we get a menu that has two plates that we can order for dinner. We can pick one from this column, but if we pick one from this column, the one over here is pretty much determined because we know that they have to add up to the mass, the weight of the atom we split. So if we split 235 uranium, then we know that if we have an atom of 100 here, we have to have an atom of 135 here. All right, so it's like a dinner menu, but you're pretty much committed to the other portion, the other serving, depending upon what you pick from one column. All right, the main thing to get out of this is here's the energy we get from heavy atoms. Because there's so many protons and neutrons in them, we get a pretty good amount of energy. And because there's a lot of atoms in every pound of something that we can use to split, we have a lot of 200 MeV events, billions of those events, in fact, per second. Okay, so this the points that you have to really understand when you talk about nuclear power. There are fissiles, as I mentioned, that will split easily if we give them an extra neutron. And it doesn't have to hit them hard, they can just absorb it. And fertiles, which if they absorb a neutron, turn into fissiles. So this is our hope for the future. A lot of fertiles in the universe, we can make fissiles from them. These two columns, one is for thorium, one is for uranium. And by passing neutrons from one to the next, we can go fissile, fertile, fissile, and we can split the fissiles and get energy. So that's really all that I expect you to get out of that. We get energy every time we split a fissile. We get energy every time a neutron is absorbed by a fertile. We have a fissile created. Okay, now here's a typical nuclear reactor the way we do it today. We have a core of fissile material that we allow fissioning to happen. The neutrons split the atoms. They release their energy. They're 200 MeV per atom, and that is heat. Essentially, it's heat because it's the physical movement of chunks of the atom and neutrons that hit other atoms in the core. So it's very simple. It's just it's a way of getting heat, splitting those atoms. And we use that heat to heat up what's called a working fluid. Working fluid is simply something that can convey the heat to some other place where we want to use it. So we have a pump here that's circulating. In this case, it's circulating water in a standard reactor. It's circulating water. Water gets hot inside the reactor. It goes over to what's called a steam generator, which is just really like a heater underneath a pressure cooker. And that water inside the pressure cooker gets turned to steam. And the steam we can use for whatever we want, such as turning a steam turbine to turn a generator, and then we get electricity. So this is the way a simple nuclear plant works today, the most common. So it's called water cooled, even though it's not cooled. We want this to stay hot, but the water is used to make the mass of material, the steam, that can be converted into other kinds of energy, mechanical energy and energy. So the other kinds of fluid that are used are like gases or metals. This could be lead. This could be molten lead. The Russians use that in some of their submarine reactors. They've used that on some of the land reactors. The working fluid is simply the name of the material that's used to convey the heat from inside the reactor out to some other place where it could be used. And it could be used for heating buildings, for instance, if they were close, or for chemical processes. If this plant were built next to a chemical manufacturing plant, then the heat could be used directly to help facilitate the chemical reactions that the company needs for its operations. Now, the key thing about this kind of a system is it's a very simple thermal energy system, and obeys what's called the Carnot efficiency, Carnot cycle efficiency. The thermal efficiency of this is very important to understand. It depends on how hot the fluid gets and how cold the end cooling system is. For instance, this steam that runs the turbine has to be condensed back into water so that it can be reheated and more energy can be put into it and delivered to the turbine. So this goes through a cycle of heating and cooling. This is the cold section that does the cooling, and this is the hot section that does the heating. The ratio of those two numbers helps determine the efficiency. So if we're in space and T cold is 0 Kelvin, then we have 1 for the efficiency, which is the best efficiency we can get. On land, this T cold is definitely not that. It's about 300 Kelvin. So we want T hot to be as hot as we can get it, because we want to minimize this number T cold over T hot, because that number is getting subtracted from 1, which would be 100% efficiency, right? So we want T hot to be hot. So we actually do want this to be red hot, even though this is not intended to be red hot in the diagram. But we would like it to look like this. It would be red hot. And we have built reactors that do that. They heat gas, or as I mentioned, liquid metal. That could be at 500 or 900 degrees centigrade. That's what we would like to have, because that makes our efficiency as high as we can get. And that's very important, because the efficiency determines how much fuel you need to consume, how much fissioning we need to do in here to get how much energy we get out of here. All right. So that's something I just try to remember, that 1 minus T cold over T hot tells you how efficiently your plant is working. So we want to get the fluid that we use to convey the heat from the reactor to the rest of the system. We want this as high as possible temperature-wise. Water is no good for that. So that's why current reactors, they don't run red hot. They're, maybe 300 degrees centigrade, something like that, 340. Water splits apart when you heat it too much. So that's bad, because H2O is H and O, and O is corrosive, so the free oxygen would be corroding the pipes and system inside here. And hydrogen can be explosive if exposed to oxygen with a spark or something. So we don't really want free hydrogen either in here. So we stay with water currently. We stay with a lower T hot and lose thermal efficiency currently with the type of systems that we use today. We want to have more advanced systems that run hotter, and that's one of the key things of modern nuclear reactors, systems that are trying to generate energy. Okay, so the question is, do we have enough fissile and fertile atoms to last us for thousands of years? And the answer is yes. I'm not going to go through this, but basically, because uranium oxide is slightly soluble in water and everything runs into the oceans from the land, over the last billions of years, the oceans have a lot of uranium in them. So we could mine uranium from oceans if we wanted to. Thorium does not, oxide doesn't dissolve in water, so thorium is on the land. And when you add the thorium and uranium together, you get thousands of years, perhaps 100,000 years of future use for all of humanity, for all of our forecasted needs for energy. So nuclear power is a very lasting, reliable form of energy. And in fact, it's actually storage, because if we look back at the graph I had before, it showed what energy we get from a splitting atom. Those atoms are sitting there waiting for us to split them. They don't split automatically. So if we don't need the power, we don't split the atom. And that's why the fuel in a nuclear reactor is just sitting there waiting to be used. If we don't have enough neutrons to split many of the uranium atoms, hey, it'll just sit there for millions of years and we don't care. So a nuclear plant, you can think of it like a flashlight battery. It's already charged. It is storage. It's stored energy from ancient solar explosions and fusion events that happened when stars died and so forth, or collided. So the whole idea of a nuclear plant is that, hey, we can use the energy when we want to. We don't have to wait for the sun to come up or the wind to blow. That's a big deal. Okay, let's go to the next thing. The most important thing a lot of people bring up is, what about the nuclear waste? Well, remember, we're only splitting a few atoms to get a lot of energy. So there's can't be very much waste. If you look on the left here, this pinky finger sized piece of uranium represents what an American's need for total energy would be for about a decade. So this would include your home heating, driving your car, cooking your food, going on trips around the world, all that kind of thing. One pinky finger worth of your fissile uranium or fissile made from uranium or thorium. If we split the atoms in here, we get all the energy you're going to need for a decade. Well, there's nothing compares with that, right? There's nothing else in the world we could do to get that kind of energy from that little amount of mass. The key to remember is that there are a huge number of atoms per ounce or gram or pound of heavy elements. So there are gazillions of atoms inside here, and each one of them we split, each one of them gives us 200 million electron volts when we split. So it's all a numbers game. And this is, again, what Einstein tried to explain to President Roosevelt, that fission has a huge amount of energy density. All right, so we split these atoms. Well, if you remember your chemistry class, which I didn't remember until I studied this again, when you split atoms, you get two atoms, typically, and they're the same size. So all atoms are about the same size, physically, as measured from the center of their nucleus to the outermost electron that's floating around in the electron cloud around each atom. So we get two of these, both the same size. So that's the waste for 10 years for one American, for all his energy needs. Two pinkies. Not very much, right? I mean, you can imagine the amount of coal ash you would have to burn, that you would get when you burned coal to give you enough energy to run all your life. So let's look at the reality of waste, nuclear waste. So if we just take these two chunks of the atoms we split, and we're not going to do anything else with them, we're going to say, okay, we're done with it, we're going to throw it away. Where would it end up? Well, we could take one NFL football field, and between the goal and the 5-yard line, and pile these all up, and that's where all 62 years now of U.S. nuclear power waste would fit in a pile about 3 meters high, about 10 feet high, between the goal and the 5-yard line. That's all our waste for supplying power for about over 10% of all the energy the United States used in the last 60 years. So is that hard to find a place to put? I don't think so. Here's what we actually do with it. Currently, we take these big canisters we make that are designed to be hit by a locomotive and not open, and take the used fuel from a reactor when the fuel is tired out, when we've used it up mostly, and put it in here, and then just put it on a concrete pad and let it go. It just sits there at every nuclear plant in the United States because the government hasn't decided what to do with the used fuel yet. But still, if we took all of the used fuel out of all these canisters around the United States, there's about 80,000 tons of it. Since uranium is a very heavy element, very dense, that's not a very big amount physically. And we could actually put it on the rest of the football field. We could simply take everything out of these canisters at all 100 or so nuclear reactors around the United States and pile it up on the football field from the 5-yard line to the next goal line. And that's, again, would be the total waste. It's not actually waste, as I will see, but that's what we would have to do. We would only have to dedicate one football field for the entire United States nuclear waste from power plants for 60 years. Pretty good. All right, so let's see, do I want that one? Yeah. Okay, so years ago, people like the Sierra Club realized this. This is what they said. Nuclear power is the way in which we preserve the environment because we don't have to clobber much of the environment to run it, to get the energy from it. Later, a couple of years later, another head of the Sierra Club had this odd idea which probably came from a number of other people involved, that if we made it so easy to get a lot of energy cleanly without ruining the environment, then the population would increase so much and business activity would increase so much that it would in turn damage the environment. So we had kind of the good making the bad happen. So, in other words, there's no self-control. Humans have no self-control. So if we give them all this energy that doesn't hurt the environment, they're going to hurt the environment by finding more things to do with all this energy and taking up more space and all this kind of thing. So at any rate, I won't go into that, but unfortunately, my dear old Sierra Club that I used to be a member of has gotten some very strange ideas. All right, here's the World Bank has recently said this is what we have to do. If we're going to meet the IPCC targets at all, which is this dashed line, horizontal line, then we're not going to be able to do it with wind and solar because you just don't get enough energy out of them, and you clobber the environment with all the windmills and all the solar panels, and all the solar panels and all the windmills only last so much time, so you have to keep recycling and making new ones and all that kind of thing. But what you can do is you can do what France has done, what Ontario, Canada has done, what Sweden has done. You can build nuclear plants. They've already done it. They're finished. They don't have to do anything more to meet the IPCC. We could catch up. All these other countries could catch up. And in particular, China is on the way to catching up. China has already leveled their greenhouse gas emissions per capita, and they have already been expanding their nuclear power enough to be able to do that and perhaps catch up with and eliminate their coal burning. So it's a matter of us listening to people who've studied this and say, well, yeah, hey, we know how to do this. Let's do it. We know people have done it already. So let's stop, pussyfooting around. Okay. Here's another way of looking at the environmental impacts of different sources of energy. Here's just the amount of space taken up by wind, onshore, offshore, solar concentrator, and here's the space taken up by nuclear. So if you want to save space, you certainly want to choose nuclear power. Materials consumption also, that's one of the other things the World Bank has warned about, is if we try to build out solar and wind consumes 10 times the amount of raw materials nuclear does. Solar consumes 16 times the amount of material that nuclear does for the same amount of energy release. This is kind of crazy. Imagine trying to choose to generate enough energy for a country or the world using systems that consume over 10 times as much raw material as you need for another source like nuclear. And that's what the World Bank has actually warned about. He said that this excessive consumption of raw materials means excessive mining, pollution, refining, all those activities, and such a distortion of world markets that to get these materials, including things like child labor, which of course some of these companies, mining companies in Africa, use kids to get the valuable raw materials that they need from difficult places in their mines. At any rate, the World Bank has said if you're going to do this, you're going to distort world markets and increase pollution and everything else. So why do this wind and solar thing? Right. That's basically what they're saying. The DOE, in its review of energy sources, came up with how much material, mining and so forth, you need to go to invest in order to build windmills or build solar panels and so forth. And that's where these numbers, the 16 and 10, come from. So the DOE and the World Bank have honestly explained what the problem is with believing that you can somehow use the, wind and solar power to power the world. Here's what the Chinese have done already. This is their, they have leveled their energy, energy emissions per capita. Here's what, this is an English, from an English newspaper. This is how much space you would need to cover with solar panels to match the output of just one nuclear plant in England. Here's how much you would have to cover with windmills to do that. At any rate, this is not, it's, you can get a better idea if you get a hold of this link. Oops. I think I forget that I'm hot here. I've got I'm not just showing this, I'm editing it. It's interesting to play this video because it shows you a simulation or a picture of this nuclear plant, a nuclear plant like this. And then as it backs away, you see all the windmills, 1,000 windmills that have to be built to equal that plant. All right, so here's what I'm talking, where is our plant? California's Diablo Canyon. CGNP.org is the group that's trying to protect it from being closed for a variety of reasons, not just because it's clean energy, but it's 10% of California's power. 30% of our clean power, it makes electricity for less than 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is, as we'll see, is better than any renewable. Its uptime is 90%. It's almost always on. It provides $1 billion in economic benefit to the county of San Luis Obispo, and it also provides desalination. That's another thing that people really will come to need to appreciate. Desalination around the world is something that is becoming a very much more important every day. And you automatically get that with a nuclear plant. You can actually increase the desalination output without hurting the power output. Here's the desalinated water for this plant, which it keeps as in case of an emergency need. The water it uses, though, for the steam generation is purified. So that's what this is. So this is desalinated lake that it keeps in reserve for its needs. And more than that could be delivered to the county. And it has 2 reactors, each one over a billion watts, which means each one of these serves 1 million homes. People talk about the waste again. We'll go to the used fuel canisters that I showed you that fit on a football field for all of the United States nuclear plants. They are at the end of this arrow, and you can't even quite see them. They're in this little shadow. And that plant's been running since 1986. So since 1986, we've been using up the fuel, uranium fuel, and we take the old fuel out when it's not got much oomph left in it, put it in those canisters up here. The canisters are actually made up here. PG&E's plant has the ability to make its own concrete and steel canisters, and it gets stored here. So it's not exactly a big deal to store the leftover nuclear fuel at the plant. This plant site was actually designed. This particular site wasn't chosen, but some site in this area was advocated by the Sierra Club years ago. So this plant was built in 1986, has been running ever since, producing 2.2 gigawatts of power, pretty much 24/7. But the site was chosen to build 4 more. In other words, there was supposed to be 6 reactors here total, which instead of being 30% of California's clean power, then would be, how much more? Would be almost all of it. It was a third of California's total power needs. And the problem that's going on right now is because California has closed down the San Onofre power plant down the coast near San Diego. This is all we've got left of guaranteed power that's reliable, highly reliable. Otherwise, we depend on gas, and the gas comes, 90% of the gas that we use in California for generating electricity comes from other states via pipeline. And so one of the things that's going on right now is cgnp.org. You should go there and look and see what information is there, and give them a little money. cgnp.org. We filed a FERC complaint, Federal Electric Regulatory Commission, that says essentially California has blackouts, brownouts, whatever, fires caused by electrical distribution and so forth. But one of the most serious things is the gas supply causes earthquake faults. So if in the next earthquake, like they had in the Ridgecrest area north of Los Angeles a while ago, pipelines will be broken. Gas will not be available. And so as a result, they'll have worse than just brownouts. So plants like this should not be closed. There's no reason to close them. And in fact, they should reopen the San Onofre plant down in San Diego area, because it was closed for no good reason. It was closed simply because the holding company wanted to get the money out of the trust fund, about $3 billion. And the CEO of Edison International, which is a holding company for the plant down there, admitted that the ratepayers down there would have to pay another $1.5 billion because they closed the plant down. So, there's all sorts of money issues in California, but one of the key things is that we are on kind of the edge of a cliff of having massive power failures in California if we do things like close this plant. Okay. All right, so here's the most recent interesting cost analysis. So here's the cost of the various sources of energy that people are led to believe are renewable. We've got wind and solar, and also things like, well, we're going to burn something that we grew. That's bioenergy. Nice way of saying it. Geothermal is fine, and hydro. When you notice the cost of the plant, the Diablo Canyon's electricity, is at or below all of them. So it's about less than 4 cents a kilowatt hour. None of these other choices currently, even though they've decreased a great deal in recent years, right? None of them come down to that level. And none of these account for the gas that must be burned when the sun's not out, when the wind's not blowing. And that's the nasty little secret that renewables, unfortunately, in California have, is that, yeah, you can get energy from the sun when the sun's up, but what are you going to do when it's not up? Well, we burn gas. That's what we do. Okay, so now let's look at some of the current history. People have been writing for quite a while. Nuclear power is dead because it's too expensive to build a plant. Well, I don't know. I mean, this plant cost $5.8 billion in 1986. It's been running since then, and its price of electricity is less than everything else. You gotta read a lot of the stuff with a grain of salt. So here's Chinese nuclear. They know what the story is. China can build a 3 gigawatt 1 gigawatt plant, like half of this Diablo Canyon, for $3 billion in 5 years. So that's what China has been doing. Now, President Kennedy warned us. He said, I'm worried about national security and economic security. Well, when your chief economic adversary is doing this, what do you think you should be doing? here's what France did when the OPEC oil embargo occurred in the 1970s. They said, oh, okay, we're going to disconnect from OPEC. We're going to take a standard Westinghouse nuclear reactor designed from the United States. We're going to mass produce it, and oops, I keep forgetting that I'm just live here. We're going to actually build it out, and we're going to get rid of particular oil combustion. And bingo, that's what they did. And ever since then, they've been flat. Their emissions have been lowest in Europe. Germany had built some nuclear as well at that time, and we're on its way to reducing. And then they decided, because of crazy politics, that nuclear was dangerous. So, well, we're going to have to do something. We're going to do wind and solar in Germany, of all places, right? So this is when they began doing that. And as a result, they have never come anywhere near the emissions reductions they should have had. India sees the same thing. They want to build out nuclear very quickly. They also have a great deal of thorium. So their issue in particular is that they can build plants that breed uranium-233 from thorium, which is a very common element. Thorium is a very common element in their minerals, particularly their beach sands. Their beach sands are very high content of thorium. Russia wants money from the rest of the world to keep going because their economy is not that great. So they're building reactors everywhere they can. And as a result of that, they've advanced while we haven't. Okay, so now let's look at safety, the other side of nuclear power. It's expensive. Well, no, it's not expensive. And it's environmentally, it has a lot of waste. No, it doesn't have a lot of waste. And it's had accidents. Okay, let's see. 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was an accident I remember going back from college to visit my parents in New Jersey, and we went to the movies, and what was showing then was China syndrome. Do you remember that with the Fondas? China syndrome the theory was that if a nuclear reactor got overheated and couldn't be cooled properly, it would get so hot it would melt its way to China. The core would. Well, of course, if you understand how gravity works, that wouldn't really happen. But at any rate, that's the movie. And then shortly after that, after I'd gone back to college, we read about 3 Mile Island happening, which is upwind of my parents' house in New Jersey. I mean, it's in Pennsylvania, but it's upwind. So, okay, so 3 Mile Island wasn't really, what was it really? Well, it wasn't really an accident. It was simply that there was a failure, and there was a failure to train the people properly inside the reactor operating room, control room. And they did a couple of wrong things, but nothing blew up and the damage was contained to that one particular reactor, which is what the containment structure is supposed to do. Well, okay, but what did 3 Mile Island actually do that was good? It showed us that we needed to have better training and better safety procedures shared amongst utilities, because the utilities that own nuclear plants didn't really communicate with each other until this event, and that caused the creation of a group called World Association of Nuclear Operators. So that made utilities cooperate with each other on safety training and general training for operating the reactor. So that was a good thing. No one was hurt, but a lot of people got educated into how to operate nuclear plants properly. Chernobyl, that's a good one. I like that one because Chernobyl's reactor design was illegal under regulations around the world, anywhere outside the USSR. So Chernobyl is actually irrelevant to Western nuclear power because it would never have been built in any of the countries that subscribe to WANO and so forth. and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Fukushima, that is an example of how, unfortunately, things happen in Japan at the management level, because Fukushima was allowed to be built at sea level, even though the site had 25 meters of natural elevation. So the TEPCO, because it's one of the biggest employers in Japan, was allowed to scrape off 25 meters of natural elevation from the site to make it easier to build the plant. And everything pretty much ended up at sea level, which meant that if a tsunami came in, which they do every 150 years there, then the plant was going to be damaged. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And in fact, the illustration, again, of an unfortunate reality of Japanese management style is that the TEPCO execs were close to the government, people in the government. And as a result, they were able to get around some of the regulatory requirements for the plant. So for instance, the seawall was never raised to the proper height for that plant. So if any of those things had happened, the plant had not been built at sea level, the seawall had been correctly raised to its proper height, we wouldn't have had the Fukushima event. It would have been a no-show. And in fact, there's a twin to the Fukushima plant that failed. There's a twin to it farther down the coast, and it didn't fail. So, you have to actually do a little research into some of these things, because what you read in the papers and so forth, it tends to be kind of exaggerated. At any rate, you can't. If you want to look at what happened at Fukushima that was really bad, it was that the government allowed people to live and work in a known tsunami zone. There are monuments around the Sendai region there with carefully carved Japanese messages in the stone that say, "Don't build here," because everybody over the centuries has known that the tsunamis come in periodically as the Pacific plate moves, under or over, I forget which, the Japan plate in the ocean. So at any rate, I like to discuss these with people because none of them have anything to do with nuclear power as being unsafe. They have to do with human mistakes that can be corrected. And as a result of that, if we look at the actual safety record, this needs to be bigger, but nuclear is safer than anything else, safer than wind, solar, any of the combustion sources of power and so forth. And the reason is because of regulation. It's carefully regulated by the NRC in the United States. People around the world follow what WENO says, what the IAEA says to do, and so forth. It's only in places that don't obey proper standards that we have danger. So this is an interesting kind of thing. On the right, this is a diagonal line. On the right, upper right of the line is what people think about the power source. So see gas and oil and coal. And what danger actually is. So this is our perceived danger, and this is the actual danger. And you can see that you can't even see yellow. The actual danger from nuclear is less than anything else. That's another way of looking at this kind of a chart. And here's another chart and so forth. So you can go through all the statistics, and you find that nuclear power by far is safer than any other choice. Oh, that was interesting. I got this mouse sometimes goes backwards. There we go. Okay, so now let's look about the future. Remember, when we're looking at the standard reactor we have today, we heat water up to try to make steam, and use the steam to turn a turbine, that kind of thing, or to heat up a chemical reaction in a chemical plant of some sort, or heat up a town. Advanced reactors will actually want to run at higher temperatures, but they also want to make their own fuel. So rather than and they'll be more efficient thermally, and we also can make our own fuel. So we breed new fissiles. So one of them is making plutonium-239 from uranium-238. If 238 catches a neutron, it becomes 239, and that 239 is a fissile, which means if it captures a neutron, it'll split and release energy. That's basically all there is to it. Well, one way we can control how that happens is by controlling the speed of the neutrons in the reactor. When an atom splits and it releases two fission products move away, and some neutrons come out, the neutrons are running at about 100,000 miles a second. Pretty fast. Those are called fast neutrons for a good reason. You can use those in a reactor to split more atoms. That's fine. But one of the problems with that is that when you're moving that fast, it's not easy to collide with things. Things effectively look smaller to you. There's kind of Einsteinian relativistic stuff in there. But the point is that one of the things that we do in a regular reactor is we have a moderator, which is water or graphite, which the fast neutrons coming out at 100,000 miles a second bounce around, hitting the molecules of the water or graphite, and they slow down. And they get slowed down enough, they can move about the same speed as the air molecules in the air around us right now, which is about a mile per second. Instead of 100,000 miles per second, it's a mile per second. So that gives them a better chance of being captured by an atom that might split. That's all there is to it. It's called cross-section. The faster the neutron, the smaller the cross-section of its chance for getting captured by a target atom. So the smaller its chance of causing a fission, or the smaller its chance of causing a fertile to be moved up one neutron to a fissile. So there's two kinds of reactors, ones with moderators, ones without moderators. Currently, the ones we use today have moderator material, water. Advanced reactors can use moderator or not. Typically, graphite is one of the ones that we pick. I'll maybe get back to that a little bit later, but let's look at this. If we look at, I mentioned that seawater contains a huge amount of uranium, about 3 tons per cubic kilometer. Thorium is all over the place. It's in the moon, Mars, Earth, all over the place. So it's very, very common. And it's about 4 times as abundant as uranium. So if we were to burn up all the uranium we could find, which was not going to be possible, I mentioned before, we have about 100,000 years at least of that. Well, we would still have thorium, and it's about 4 times as much of it. So there's plenty of it. Plenty is available. Let's look at the advanced reactors that would use different kinds of fuel. One of the things, remember, we want to get is higher temperature. We want to get the thermal efficiency up. So one of the ways we can do this is with molten salt. As the working fluid, instead of water, we use molten salt. Salt melts at about 400 degrees centigrade. We would run the reactor red hot, which would be about 700 degrees centigrade. A molten salt reactor requires no pressure. So here's an example of it. We built this at Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the 1960s and operated it. It works fine. It's great. It's still there. The molten salt is in the core and in the piping. This doesn't show the rest of the piping. You pump the molten salt through the core, and fission occurs, heats up the salt. Salt goes over to some place that you want to get hot, like a chemical process or a steam generator or something of that sort. So the core gets hot, but it's liquid, and there's no pressure. So there's nothing to blow up. No steam here. No steam here, nothing to blow up. If something did go wrong, and this was got a little too hot or something, well, it's molten salt. So what you do is you have a plug here that is cooled, and if this gets too hot, it melts the plug because it's salt, and all the salt runs out into storage tanks. And that's where it is actually now. This reactor was operated until 1969. In 1969, they let the salt run out down. It's in tanks underground, still there, still sitting there. I think we sold some of the salt to the Czechs, because the Czechs were doing molten salt research as well. But at any rate, this is a very safe reactor, no pressure, nothing to blow up. It has a graphite core to moderate, to slow the neutrons down. So it is a very pretty standard kind of design as far as that's concerned. But the salt lets us operate at a higher temperature, therefore we get much better thermal efficiency. You can also look at some of the small modular reactor designs we're talking about now. This is one that was done a while ago. Again, it uses salt as a fluid, but it uses a solid fuel, as uranium fuel. This is another kind of fuel that has been used. It can be used inside salt. It's a pellet about the size of your thumb. It's got little bits inside there of uranium fuel, and it's sealed. This is a carbide shell, so this is indestructible, and that's the whole idea. These little pellets are made, and they're indestructible. They go into the reactor. When the uranium is used up, they come out of the reactor as waste. That's kind of the problem I see with them, is that they are guaranteed waste. After about a few months in the reactor, you got to find a place to put them. And then these are some other current ones. There's a place called X Energy. It's working on it. Terrestrial Energy is Canada. They're going through approval in Canada. This is a molten salt reactor also. And Thorcon, which is working in Malaysia to build a molten salt reactor. And the idea of the molten salt, of course, is simply to make it unpressurized, high temperature, efficient, and therefore safe. This is an interesting bit because this is plutonium-238, which can be produced using the thorium fuel cycle in any kind of reactor, molten salt or whatever. But this is red hot. Plutonium-238 is continually releasing energy. It's red hot. This is what we use to power our Mars rovers and any spacecraft that go beyond Mars, because solar energy is not enough to run our machinery past Mars. So they use a thermal generator. This plutonium, a chunk of plutonium connected to a thermoelectric generator plate, will produce electricity for the spacecraft. In fact, you may have heard that the Voyager spacecraft that we launched in the 70s finally left the solar system a year or so ago. These slugs of plutonium-238 are still hot enough to generate electricity so that we can actually still get a signal from the Voyager spacecraft back on Earth. Kind of amazing. The Russians used a lot of this for powering remote military devices. At any rate, but I should say, we can't get any more from Russia, so we have to make our own, and the only way we can really make this is with the thorium fuel cycle in a reactor. Okay, let's look again at the waste issues. We have two choices in terms of how we get fissiles and how we make them, if we want to, from fertiles. Uranium-233 is what we make from thorium-232. 232 captures a neutron, becomes 233, decays into uranium-233, and this has a very, very good property of fissioning easily if it captures a neutron. So the waste is the fission products, and what happens when the atom, fissile atom like 233, captures a neutron but doesn't fission. A small portion of the time that will happen. It becomes 234. And then if it captures another neutron, 235. 235 we know fissions. That's what we use currently in reactors. So if 235 can fission, but 235 could also capture with a neutron without fissioning and become 236, and so forth. So this green line represents what happens as you build heavier and heavier elements from a 233 atom that didn't fission. So you go 233, 234, 235, 236, 237, right? So those atoms decay away over this many years. And you can see that we're talking hundreds of years for the 233 fuel, but for the 235 fuel, we're talking about thousands and thousands of years. These are thousands of years, hundreds of years. So if we use uranium-235 as we do currently, which is mixed with 238 in the reactor, then we get 236, 237, 238, 239, and so forth. So the decay time for the waste is much longer when we use the current cycle, 230, using your U-235 and 238, than if we use thorium-232 and make 233 from it. So this is an advantage of the thorium cycle. The fission products, the blue line, are the same pretty much for everything. Remember those two peaks that I showed you? They're about the same no matter what we fission. So what's the test? The test is come down. How long does it take for waste to decay until it's the same as uranium ore in terms of its radioactivity? So this is the radioactivity of uranium ore found outside in nature. How long does it take for a given fuel product, the products from a given fuel use, to get down below that yellow-orange line? And so this is why the green line is better than the red line. Very simple. So this is a choice between thorium cycle and uranium cycle that we currently use. The choice is, well, we have less waste, less long-term waste. This chart is the heat. If a reactor is running, we get a certain amount of heat continually, like 1 billion watts from one of the reactors at Diablo Canyon. As soon as we stop the fission, which can be done by putting in control rods that absorb the neutrons. The neutron economy in a reactor makes it work or not work. If there's not enough neutrons, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to die, start cooling off. As soon as we turn off the neutron production in a reactor by putting in control rods, for instance, it starts to cool down. And this is the cool down curve. This is what caused a problem at Fukushima, because they only had, before the tsunami came in, they were already cooling the reactor down, but they only got this far, about 40 minutes. And so there's still a huge amount of heat in the reactor. The top amount here, the top heat production when a reactor is first shut down, is about 7% of the radiant energy. So if it's a billion watt reactor, 7% of 1 billion watts, right, is 7 million watts. So that's a lot. So you have to cool it down. You have to let it cool down longer before you can just say, okay, everything's fine. Well, they only got 40 minutes. If they had 4 hours, it would have been safe. There would have been no event, because down there, we're down to 1%. After 4 hours, there's only 1% of the heat left in the reactor. They only got 40 minutes before the tsunami came in and the cooling system was ruined. That's really the reason I put this up. This is just something that you can know, and you can understand then why something could happen bad when you can't cool the reactor down. Okay. All right, I mentioned something about cross-section for causing fission. This is a complicated graph, but it's not really the only thing I want you to get out of it. This is what an atom looks like to a speeding neutron when the neutron has been slowed down, moderated to 1 mile per second. Thermal. It's called thermal, because that's the heat of the air around us controls how fast the atoms are moving, molecules are moving. So it looks pretty big. And here's what it looks like for fission for 233. So for plutonium 239 fission, the atom looks pretty good, pretty big. For uranium 233 fission, the atom's not as big, but it's pretty big for a thermal neutron. So when neutrons are moving slowly, this is how they see a 239 atom and a 233 atom. As far as the chance for causing fission, blue, or the chance for being captured and moving up to 240 or moving up to 234. That's all these mean. It's very simple. But if we don't slow them down with a moderator, this is how big they look. See? So that's the difference between a fast reactor and a thermal reactor. It's not how hot it gets, it's how fast the neutrons are moving and how big, because of their speed, the target that they would like to hit appears to be. And that controls how much fuel we have to put in a reactor. Obviously, if this represents the chance of getting hit and captured by 239 with a fast neutron, and this by a small neutron, then in order to get the same amount of energy out of the reactor, we're going to have to put a heck of a lot more fissile atoms into this little tiny circle. All right. So this is the issue with a fast reactor versus a thermal reactor. We use thermal reactors today. We use water as the moderator, as well as the working fluid. So we get targets that are this big. We don't have many fast reactors in the world because the target shrinks so much. We do want to have fast reactors because we can use them to breed 239 from 238. So, it's a trade-off. If it's a problem for the future choices and design choices by engineers as to how many fast reactors we want to build versus how many thermal reactors we want to build, because thermal doesn't need as much startup fuel by a factor of about 20 as a fast reactor needs. So this is an engineering decision. It's a resource availability decision as well. Just there to bring that out. Okay, so here's the first commercial reactor, lower left, Pennsylvania, Shippingport, Pennsylvania. It was a 60 megawatt plant based on the submarine reactor that Admiral Rick oversaw in the 50s. This guy was actually used for both uranium and thorium cycles over its lifetime until 1982. So we learned a lot from this particular plant, even though it was a commercial reactor. I mentioned before the waste that we get from a nuclear plant. Well, we get very little waste from the fission, but here's all the uranium-238 that we can't use currently. And it's in these canisters in Kentucky and Ohio, just lying around in fields because it's not particularly radioactive. It's just uranium-238 from nature. But this is the leftover from what was called the re-enrichment process. So when we want to get a fuel for a typical solid fuel reactor like we have today, we take the uranium from the nature and we discover that, well, there's only 0.7% of it is uranium-235, which is a fissile from which we can derive energy. We can split the fissile. Most of it is 238. Over 99% of it is 238. So what are we going to do? We need to have a time machine to take us back to the Oklo reactor at the beginning that ran 2.2 billion years ago. Because the half-life of uranium-235 is 700 million years about. So we need to go back 700 million years, 700 million years, 700 million years to get to Oklo's fuel in the rocks, which was a much larger, about 5% uranium-235. So we got to separate the 235 and 238 that we find today, because most of the 235 is gone. It's decayed away. It only has a 700,000 year half-life. So that means that we end up with a lot of this 238 that we separated out from the 235 and 238 mixture from natural uranium. So you can think of the enrichment process as a time machine that goes back to the time of Oklo Gabon 2.2 billion years ago. And as a result of that, we get a little bit of 235 and we have a lot of 238 to kind of just put off to the side. But this is fuel for a fast neutron reactor, because a fast neutron reactor can create 239 out of 238, right? A moderated reactor can do the same thing. Of course, I shouldn't really say that that's just for fast reactors. So this is fertile fuel for a reactor that's going to fission plutonium. Here's the thorium cycle, which is the other choice that we have for fertile. So this is all fertile. It's ready to be turned into fissile if we want to. Thorium is fertile. Here's thorium down here. If we have a reactor that's splitting atoms and releasing neutrons, and the neutrons, let's say, are slowed down by some moderator, bouncing around in a moderator, and then they come out slow so that the cross-section is big for thorium to capture it, captures it, the thorium atom becomes unstable, it decays into protactinium, which is the next 233 atom, and protactinium decays into uranium-233, and now we can fission that, and we can make this cycle go forever. So as long as we keep putting in thorium here, which we find in beach sand in India or Brazil, it's a very common waste product from rare earth mining, when the people are looking for materials to make solar panels with and wind generators with. We get a lot of thorium.
Alex, we are at time. We have to stop at least for the recording anyways. Usually at this time we switch to a general discussion, and we've kind of gone through like all of the question and answer time. Is that okay? Can we switch over to, are you fine with switching to general discussion? I think there's a number of questions and comments. From the group.
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready because this is the last slide, essentially.
Okay. So I'm allowing everybody to unmute. So hopefully all of us can give you a hand. It was a very detailed presentation, but it was very informative. So thanks for that. And I'll let everybody jump in and ask questions. In the meantime, I have to hold up a card, a white card on my screen for the editor. But please, otherwise, go ahead.
Can you unshare, maybe?
Who's up? Talk. Hello. Yeah, I didn't hear too much about fusion. I know it's very difficult, but there's a thing, a ratio in my mind that is kind of interesting. The density of hydrogen for fusion versus uranium is about 1,000 to 1. So without any mitigation, the fusion reactor will have to be 1,000 times bigger than a normal uranium reactor. So I just wanted to mention that why fusion is going to be even more difficult than they thought 50 years ago.
Well, one of the degrees, when I was a grad student at Stanford, the first group I was in was the plasma physics group, and we were doing, mathematical and experimental research that was not with no big machines, just little stuff. that was pertinent to fusion. And we had a Christmas party in 1961. I remember and people around drinks, they said, well, when do you think fusion will be a prototype? When there'll be a prototype fusion machine out there? And so this is 1961. And so everybody thought about it. And then we came up with, well, 20 years. Well, in 2011, we had the 50th reunion of the plasma physics group. And we had drinks and everything at Stanford, and somebody said, well, what do you think we should say now about when fusion is going to have a prototype? And everybody thought 30 years. So every 50 years, it slips 10 years, I guess. I mean, fusion, unfortunately, fusion is fine, except that there are different kinds of it. Remember, it's on the left side of that diagram I put up with iron in the middle, and on the left side, you're fusing small atoms into big ones. And you get a little bit of energy each time you do that. But remember, there's not many atoms, not many, nuclear particles in each of those atoms. So the energy density, is good, but it's not quite as good per nucleus as fission is. However, per pound, it is good. It is better, but it's a big. You have to decide what you're going to fuse, where you're going to get what you're going to fuse. What are the products of fusion that are different from one choice of atoms to fuse versus another? For instance, there's a huge amount of high energy neutrons that come out of typical deuterium, hydrogen deuterium, tritium fusion. So you're going to have a huge amount of damage from all these, maybe 100 times more neutrons flying around for the same amount of energy inside the reactor vessel. And nobody knows really exactly what to do with it. So, I mean, one of the suggestions that was, well, you have a liner of metal that you sacrifice. Okay, so you have to change the liner. You have to shut down the machine, change the liner, put a new liner in, that kind of thing, periodically. Anyway, it's interesting. I mean, fusion is fine, but we will never be able to do it the way the sun and stars do it, for a very simple reason. Stars have a unidirectional, always compressive, electromagnetically independent force called gravity. If we could make a machine that could reproduce the gravity at the interior of a star, what would happen? Right? What would happen to us and everything around us? So anyway, fusion is fine, but it's easy to do fusion. The guy who invented raster scanned TV, Philo Farnsworth, in the 1930s, built fusing vacuum tubes that he could fuse hydrogen in. It was great, but of course he never got more energy out than he got in, and if he had, he would be in trouble. So,
yeah. Thank you.
So, Alex, I've got a question on the nuclear byproducts that are in our environment right now. We've got some from nuclear weapons testing back in the early days, and we've got some from nuclear power plant accidents. And I'd like you to compare and contrast the amount and types of those radioactive materials that are in our environment.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, from the American accidents like 3 Mile Island, nothing significant was released, so you can't really assess that. From Chernobyl, they had a huge release of stuff, and the ones that are dangerous, the isotopes, the fission products, in particular isotopes that are dangerous, are the ones that mimic chemicals that our bodies, plants and animals, need. So calcium, for instance, so strontium, cesium, those if they're radioactive and we ingest something that has concentrated them, that's not good, because internal radiation is the dangerous kind. External radiation is so dangerous because it has to, most of the radiation from radioactive materials is stopped by the skin, our skin. But if you have ingested something like iodine, that's one of the key ones to control. So iodine was released by the Chernobyl explosion. Iodine-131 is a fission product. It's in one of those peaks, two peaks, of fission product.
I've been reading some things about, the stuff in our atmosphere and oceans that isn't particularly hazardous, but it's there and it can be measured and quantified, and people that don't understand that stuff isn't really hazardous are
right
about it. And you get a lot of things from Chernobyl and Fukushima that are still in the atmosphere and oceans, but again, they're not particularly hazardous.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's what I'm saying is if it's something that could be ingested and become part of the body of a cell, because the cell would need that particular, like calcium or iodine. Iodine has a short half-life of a couple of weeks, which means that you got to deal with it quickly if you're going to prevent people from taking it up. But the Russians did not, and that's the problem with Chernobyl. They were trying to keep it quiet. They were trying to keep quiet what happened, and so they didn't distribute iodine pills to residents nearby, and as a result, they did take in iodine-131 and damaged their thyroids. So some people had thyroid cancer, which is not really a very serious disease all the time, but it's preventable. And so, but cesium and strontium, those two in particular are bone-centered, nutrients, and so you don't really want to ingest them. But yeah, there's stuff. The problem is there's so much natural radiation, in the world that it takes a lot for us to put something out there that would actually damage people, except in the air. Obviously, everybody breathes the air, so the atmospheric testing of atomic weapons was an important thing to halt. And I'm not sure. My wife got thyroid cancer later in life, but we're not sure. It could have been from the atomic weapons testing because of the iodine that you would pick up from that. But again, we control the waste. I mean, the waste that's from that power plants, we control it. And it doesn't really matter that the government hasn't taken it yet because it takes up so little space in a typical plant site. And as long as you keep it sealed up for enough time, it's not like millions of years or anything, which is one reason why, again, the thorium cycle is good, because the half-lives of the materials that are radioactive are much smaller. And so you benefit that way. So, but the amount of the waste is so small in general compared to the amount of equivalent waste that would come from other sources of energy, particularly combustion sources, that nuclear power, if it's properly managed, is fine. And as I said before, I think it's the only way that you can actually destroy weapons materials too. So that's a real plus. But Putin didn't like that we were doing we had that agreement to destroy their warheads. We gave them $50 billion, and they gave us a bunch of warheads to destroy, but he wouldn't have done that.
It'd be really good if we could get a political environment where, we have in the U.S. enough nuclear warheads to destroy the world a number of times over. If we could take, a third or half of those warheads and turn them into energy, just as a gesture of goodwill and an example for other countries that have nuclear weapons, we might be on the road to something much better.
Yeah, that's certainly a possible goal that people would like to follow. Yeah. Trouble is, you can never account for human nature, particularly when somebody gets in charge of a weapon system that makes them feel very powerful. Now the other thing I wanted to mention was that I didn't show you the slides from a fellow in Canada who's an engineer, not nuclear, a power engineer in general, has nuclear experience as well. But it lists the different paths now that Canada is taking to implement new nuclear designs, and they're very good. I mean, they know what they're doing. So that file I will give to Alex, and he can make it available perhaps to anybody who wants it. But it just explains briefly what's going on in Canada with regard to new nuclear designs. And we should be very encouraged, because we know that the world has been able to bring people on board with standards and regulations, like China, as they expand their nuclear power systems, and that's very encouraging. So I think that Canada provides a big basis for that too. So, any other questions? Now I think you have my email address. You can always email me or Alex. You can email Alex and he can send you the slides because he has them.
I'll give your email address to Brian, who puts things. Actually, I'll find out who puts things on the internet with the slides, and I'll include your email there.
Okay. So we have, with Diablo Canyon, we have, as I said earlier on, we are attempting to protect it through cgnp.org. Anything that you can do to check them out and maybe give them a little money would be great. The whole idea is California really is in a dangerous state with regard to electrical energy. As you might know, if you've been browned out yet, we haven't been. But
we have a question in the chat on Zoom. I don't know if you can bring that up or not.
Do I click on it? Oh, there's 13. It says 13 here.
Oh,
that just means
chat button.
Yeah, I did.
Then it should bring up the chat on the right, and you should see.
Oh, yeah. Okay, from Matt Wilkinson. Okay, thanks very much. Okay. I believe Fukushima had its cooling pumps in the basement below water line, putting them on the roofs. Yeah, well, Fukushima had 6 reactors total. Only a couple of them were operating. In fact, it was due to be decommissioned soon. Number 6 was actually the way they should have done all of them. It was up on a raised. I guess part of the elevation that they hadn't scraped away. Number 6 was on top of that, and it never lost any power or cooling. So that's. Oh, and I should mention that there's a reactor up the coast, a nuclear plant that has just been partly restarted in Japan, 50 miles up the coast from Fukushima. It was never hurt. It actually housed hundreds of refugees from the tsunami. And it's called Onagawa, Onagawa, Onagawa. And there was an article about it as the one of the reactors that didn't fail. Actually, there were 41 reactors operating at the time of that great earthquake and tsunami, and Fukushima were the only ones that had a problem with failure. Let's see. How do you control the fear factor? Oh, how do you control it? Well, yeah, that's the facts, I guess. You just keep putting out the facts. That's why that safety diagram is. There's all sorts of different ways of looking at the safety. I put up a few on that slide, but I mean, it's. Have you ever seen pictures of people maintaining windmill blades? I mean, how do they get up there? Well, it's ropes. One of the other things that would be interesting to find out is the workers that maintain things like windmills that are very dangerous, physically, to do that work. Who do they work for? And the reason that's important is because cell phone companies, for example, for years have insulated themselves from the actual workers that do work and sustain injuries and have claims. And the way they do that is that essentially the people who work on the towers are gig workers. They go around the country and work on cell towers. They're not actually employees of Verizon or any of the other cell companies. So their injuries don't appear in OSHA reports. That's something to consider. In nuclear business, I remember we had an event years ago where somebody was cleaning a bathroom and spilled some ammonia. That was a level 4 event that had to be reported to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Right. So the difference between industries and safety is remarkable. And the fear business, I think education is the only way that you can control that. I mean, actually, every environmentalist who thinks nuclear is dangerous should go watch what happens when people build solar panels or build windmills or maintain them, that kind of thing. It's just a totally different scale.
So did you answer that last question?
Most power plants. Let's see. Most power plants, nuclear waste storage, waste transport, and uranium mining are commercial enterprises. Could you speak to the role of the government in oversight, exploitation, and dealing with the waste products of nuclear power? Okay, so, the waste storage is done at the plants. That's it. I mean, we have no federal program to transport the used nuclear fuel. And remember, used nuclear fuel is about 95% just uranium-238, like what's in those canisters I showed that are left over from the enrichment process. So it's like water and milk. You buy a jug of milk, a gallon of milk, most of it's water. Well, the water isn't dangerous. It's just like the nuclear fuel. Over 90% of it is uranium-238, which isn't dangerous. The reason it's there is because it's safe to dilute the nuclear materials, right? So they cannot be used for anything other than a power plant. Let's see, oversight. Oversight, I mean, is very tight. I mean, the NRC is, as I said, if somebody spilled something in a bathroom, had to report it. Waste transport and uranium mining. Okay, so uranium mining in the past largely was done for the military process, weapons manufacturing. uranium mining these days, if it's not an already existing mine like an open pit mine in Australia or something like that, is done very, very simply with the same way that people do fracking. They drill horizontal bores through a deposit that they have ascertained contains uranium, a mineralized uranium that's valuable to them. And they inject either in a slightly acidic or slightly alkaline water, and depending upon the chemistry of the mineral that they're looking for, and they run that through, and as it returns out of the mine plumbing, they can separate the uranium from the water. It's a very non-intrusive process, because as long as you know where the water is going and the water that you put in comes out, you don't pollute anything. So the idea is to use liquid chemistry, with benign materials like baking soda for alkaline, and vinegar like acid for the acidic chemistry. But it's not digging big holes anymore, as far as I mean, there are big holes around the world already for a lot of different minerals, and one of them being uranium, as in Australia, uranium coal, so forth. So the big holes are still there, but the new techniques for mining something like uranium are quite benign, and we don't need very much of it, as long as because we need a pinky per American per decade, basically.
I think Jim has a question. He unmutes himself.
Okay.
Considering the sites, how does Diablo plant have a greater safety margin than the Fukushima?
Oh, well, Fukushima Daiichi, which is the one that failed, was at sea level. The reactors and turbines at Diablo are 80 feet up.
Okay. It looked like they were right. They didn't look like they were that high up, but and they are in the earthquake zone.
Yeah. So and earthquakes. Yeah. So I should mention that. So their intake obviously they have to bring in the cooling water, the T-cold source, to the turbine condenser to condense the steam, and that has to be at sea level, obviously. But the turbine is up on a hill. It's up on 80, it's 80 feet up. One of the reasons that Fukushima was at sea level was that TEPCO, the owner, wanted to minimize the pumping losses, right? Because you have to pump the water out of the ocean up to the condenser for the steam turbines, right? I mean, that was one of the simple ideas. It was dumb. It was certainly dumb, but it was dumb because the regulator let them do it, and the regulator let them do it because TEPCO is one of the biggest companies in Japan and has very close ties to the government. So that's the way Japanese business often works. I worked for Mitsubishi Electric for a couple of years, and on one trip to Tokyo, you understood why Mitsubishi was so close to the Japanese government for many, many years, including during World War II, because you would stand at the front, you would stand at the gate for the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, and you would turn around, looking away from the Imperial Palace, and you would see a whole bunch of buildings, all the same, 30 stories high, well, maybe not quite 30 stories high. And they were all Mitsubishi buildings. So you can imagine that TEPCO being the largest employer in Japan and whatever, had similar kind of influence with the government. And that's what happened. Unfortunately, that has been kind of a business standard operating procedure in Japanese business. I mean, the Mitsubishi was founded by a shogun whose business was supplying materials and weapons to different competing interests in Japan, and warlords, that kind of thing. At any rate, yeah.
But what is the earthquake risk for Diablo?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to do that. So there's been a debate ever since we got involved. CG&P got involved with PG&E on this issue. There's been a statement, well, they keep discovering faults. There's a fault offshore under the water. There's faults along the coastal area where the plant's built. Well, you can't really walk 1,000 feet east and west or northeast northeast, southwest in California and not cross a fault. The problem is that people haven't had it explained to them the way it should be. If you look at what the buildings are that are comprised of a nuclear plant, they're the strongest shapes, strongest materials ever used for anything. I mean, I have a picture of one of the containment buildings being built in 1986. It shows the 1-inch diameter rebar that's wrapped like a basket weave around the sides of the containment building, and then the concrete that's put on that. And you understand then why, even if there's a huge earthquake, that building's not going anywhere. And they've dug down to, what seems to be bedrock in California, and there's nothing. There's nothing to happen. I mean, the building's not going to fall apart. The structure's not going to fall apart. The earth may fall away from it. That kind of thing. There's another example in back east in 2010, I think. There's a nuclear plant called North Anna in Virginia, and there was an earthquake 11 miles line of sight down into the earth, epicenter 11 miles from the plant. The plant shook, the grid went down, the plant was not damaged, but the grid couldn't come up for a few days. That earthquake was felt in New York City and up in Boston. It had no effect on the plant. I think what happened that they could identify was that one of the canisters holding used fuel moved a few inches on its pad, on its concrete pad. And that was it. So the plant was fine. The earthquake was about 5.8, so it wasn't as big as it could be. But the whole idea of a nuclear plant is it's built to be strong, because it has to, the containment building in particular, the structure, the cylindrical shape, has to contain a steam explosion. Because we're using water, we're trying to convert it, we're trying to heat it as hot as we can to get that T-hot up. Remember when I got that T-hot up? But we can't get it too high because then the water comes apart into oxygen and hydrogen and starts, corroding the plumbing. So you've got this structure that's designed to contain, 1,000 psi of steam. And so it's got to be strong. It's why bin Laden didn't send any airplanes at nuclear plants. He knew better he was an engineer, he knew better. I mean, it's a sad thing, but that's why. He knew nothing would happen. And in fact, that's pretty much the standard the NRC applies to the containment structures for nuclear, is an airplane. But in California, because there's so many faults, particularly along the coast, that's actually an advantage because there was a quake in 2006, I think, at San Simeon down near Hearst Castle, which is just above where the nuclear plant at Diablo is. And that earthquake had no effect whatsoever on the plant. But it did destroy some buildings, some masonry buildings in San Simeon. Well, one of the reasons why there's not much energy that's transmitted in our faulted regions of California, because every fault acts as kind of an insulator, an absorber, like a bumper that we used to have on cars. As the energy from one fault is being transmitted through the ground, the next fault is moving slightly with respect to it, absorbing energy. So the energy dissipates very quickly from an earthquake fault in California, unless it's a blind fault like they have down there, Los Angeles, and they have mountains that are intercepting the fault. So that Diablo would be not an issue as far as earthquakes, as far as I can see. I mean, they've had an experience with a 6.5 quake at San Simeon, and not that far away, and had no effect. So I wouldn't worry about it. And in Japan, none of the plants. There were 41 reactors operating in Japan on that day. None of them were damaged by the earthquake. In fact, the Onagawa plant, which is only 50 miles from Fukushima, was later reported to have suffered more shaking than any other nuclear plant on record in the world by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And yet that plant is now, at least part of it has been restarted and operating. So again,
I want to jump in real quick. Just to let everybody know, we're past 1 p.m., which is usually our end point. I have no problem leaving this Zoom meeting up for a little while. I assume we're probably off of Twitch already, but I can let it go and we can keep discussing. I did order lunch, so I'll leave when my lunch arrives, but we can keep going. There are a couple of questions in the Zoom chat, a couple of new ones. If you want to take a look at those, and get another one. It's a comment, I think.
Oh, is there any wear and tear on the due to radiation that would require a plant to be retired? There's one form of change to the plant that I mentioned with fusion. Certain fusion produces a huge flux of neutrons, which can be damaging to metal structures. There's what's called neutron capture in let's say the steel reactor vessel and the plant that holds the water and the fuel. The fuel gets the water hot. Diablo Canyon has its own independent safety committee. Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee. You can look it up, you can Google it, and you can actually go to their meetings. They monitor all the plant's operations, and they know what's going on at any time. In particular, the one degradation that can occur is that a neutron flux, which we need for operating the reactor to keep the fissioning going. Neutron flux into the walls of the steel vessel that holds the water and the fuel can do what they call embrittlement. A neutron, you could hold a neutron in your hand, and in a few seconds, it would turn into a proton. It's not very happy being alone. It wants to actually turn into a proton. It shoots out an electron, which is a beta particle, and becomes a proton. Magic of nature. Well, if it enters the steel, which it can, because neutrons like penetrating metal. They don't have too much of a problem penetrating metal. And stops inside of the steel containment vessel. Fuel vessel. They will turn to hydrogen, right? And as a result of that, the strength of the steel is diminished slightly in that particular region. So if this goes on for years and years and years, you can imagine that this feature called embrittlement of steel could occur enough to say that the vessel really should be changed, or a new one brought in. That embrittlement issue is monitored continuously as the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee requires, by having tabs of the same steel that the vessel is made of inserted in with the fuel assemblies. And every so often they pull out a tab or two or more and examine them microscopically and chemically to see whether or not there's been any significant embrittlement. And there's been none so far. Plant's been operating since 1986. Now the Russians have developed the ability to anneal the reactor vessel on site. All you have to do is heat it up to a certain temperature, heat up the steel to a certain temperature. The hydrogen deposition will be kicked out, evolved, and the vessel will be as good as new. The fact that they can do it on site means that they don't have to actually substitute a new vessel for an old one, which is an extremely beneficial expense reduction. So if you wanted to, if we detect that Diablo Canyon's reactor, either reactor is suffering from embrittlement of the containment vessel, now you call the Russians over and give them some more money. They won't give us any weapons anymore, but maybe they'll anneal our vessel. But that is such a slow process that it's unlikely that you'd ever have to do it in a commercial power plant. But it could be done. I mean, as I said, they do it in Russia. Oh, by the way, and a reactor vessel, unfortunately, the United States no longer has the ability to make reactor vessels. If we wanted a new one, it's done in Korea, South Korea, pretty much. You have to have a large forge that's 20 or 30 feet, can handle this 20 or 30 feet diameter steel pot. It's not easy to do. So anyway, that stuff is monitored continually by the Diablo for the Safety Commission and by the NRC for other power plants.
Thank you.
Most reactors, home country of Belgium has, retired because of cement structure degradation. Belgium reactors retired because of cement structure degradation. I don't know, I don't know why. You could probably look up and figure out what the reports are and why those Belgian reactors. One of the nasty things that's been going on over there in Europe is that some of the countries who have been dedicated to coal, like Poland, have decided to convert to nuclear, and Germany has been influencing the EU to try to prevent them from doing that. Because German politics is so anti-nuclear for no good reason now that they're not even going to let anybody else, make rational choices. So while Germany pollutes everybody with coal and lignite burning and so forth, and pretends that they get power from wind and solar while buying nuclear power from France and so forth, we have other countries that are being, they're pressuring them not to do nuclear. But Poland is actually going ahead to replace some of its coal with nuclear. Let's see what else is here. Sorry.
There's a question right before that last comment you read about, can the technology be scaled down?
Oh, yeah. Small batteries, right? Well, there was a joke years ago that somebody was going to have a nuclear-powered car, I don't know if you ever remember the Chrysler attempt to have a gas turbine in a car. You certainly wouldn't want to stand behind it. So the way we do nuclear power in the United States, regulated by the NRC, has been very limited spectrum of choices. And that's what's going on today. We're looking at smaller reactors, modular designs, factory produced, assembled, and so forth. And that's very good, because you need smaller amounts of power for various places that might be distant, small communities, and so forth. Canada's kind of interesting. They want to reduce the carbon footprint of their tar sands processing, which it sounds, crazy, but the government wants them to do that, so they're looking at small modular reactors for producing the electricity and heat they need for processing tar sands into oil and so forth that they can ship to us to burn. So, there's a huge variety of things that are happening, but certainly small modular reactor designs are possible. The one at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, that ran in the 1960s that I mentioned, ran red hot, molten salt reactor. It produced 8 megawatts. So 8 megawatts is not very much power for a power plant, but it certainly is enough for a small community in a remote location. Okay, so do I know Bill Wattenberg, deceased? I've heard the name before, but I don't really know. Biogas. So there's all these things. Okay, this bio something. So pretty much anything that starts with bio, you have to think, okay, well, what it really is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis was not invented by Mother Nature to give us energy. It's actually fairly inefficient process, about 7% net energy capture from the sun. Well, solar panels currently are about 20% net energy capture. So that's something is biogas, biofuel, whatever, is not going to be a great source of energy without causing problems. I mean, if you grow something to burn, you also have that equation I mentioned, 1 minus T cold over T hot. It better burn really hot. Because if it doesn't, it's, you're going to be wasting a lot of energy. Let's see, what else here? Did I miss anything? Scaled down. Yeah. So nuclear power will provide with modular size reactors about 100 megawatts, 60 megawatts maybe. Remember the first nuclear power plant in Shippingport, Pennsylvania was a 60 megawatt device. It was, more about what an aircraft carrier would need, big submarine, that kind of thing. The other thing about that reactor in particular, I think I mentioned, it was converted to use thorium as thorium and uranium-233 breeding cycle, so that it could breed its own fuel as it operated. In 1977, Admiral Rickover and his top physicist redesigned the core of that reactor to use metallic thorium and metallic uranium-233. as fuel and got it running in 77 that way. And in 1982, they took it apart because the plant was going to be decommissioned. And they found that there was 1% more fuel in it in 1982 than they had put in it in 1977. So that demonstrated the breeding of new fuel from thorium, which is not a fissile. Thorium is fertile, but not fissile. So they had converted enough of the thorium into uranium-233 during the 5 years of operation that way to negate any fuel loss. They had made up for whatever fuel they used. So that's the thorium cycle. And the thorium cycle is actually, as I said, because of the radioactive long-term fission product, not fission products, but what they call transuranics. When an atom doesn't fission, it captures the neutron, keeps moving up by one. So 233, 234, 235, 236, 239, 240. When you're up in there, 241, you're up in the area of what they call transuranics, and some of them have long lives. And if you don't want to produce them, because then they have to store the material for a long time before it decays, its radioactivity decays enough. So that's one of the reasons for the thorium cycle as well.
Another question about regulations.
Do you think regulations will support the new reactors in the U.S. and diminish the not in my backyard here? Okay. One of the problems is human nature about anything. So we have organizations that have grown up. In fact, there's an article just recently in an LA paper about this, of how Friends of the Earth was created by combustion industry to protect them from nuclear. Well, that's partly true. It's true in different ways for different organizations. I mean, a lot of these organizations really depend upon the money coming in from their members. So if nuclear power is something that will get them money by scaring their members, then they do it. I don't think that they're going to convince people that smaller reactors means that they're not going to have to worry about things like waste, which we don't have to worry about, or explosions, which we don't have to worry about. But as they see things happening that are good, they're okay, that are safe, even though they're small and new, things will probably change. But even McKibben was interviewed a few years ago, started 350.org, and he admitted that he said, well, yeah, I understand nuclear is probably better, but if I support it, I'm going to lose half my members. Okay, well, okay. So do you care about the planetary environment being lost, or do you care about half your members being lost? I don't know. So human nature is a very difficult thing to deal with, as we should have learned over the last 4 years. I think that the economics is such that people who are responsible for providing and regulating energy systems will naturally, governments in particular, will naturally fall into support of the newer, smaller nuclear designs. But as I say, Russia is going around the world building these large reactors for Bangladesh and all these other countries. We better be aware of that, because they're not going to be coming to us for parts or new designs or anything like that. They're going with the Russians, and the Russians need the money. I mean, that's the basis. So I really hope that the media actually wises up a bit about nuclear power. And particularly the World Bank has made very clear recommendations and statements about the dangers of trying to proceed without nuclear power expansion. It just doesn't make any sense.
Are there any other questions? I didn't see any in the chat.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I wanted to comment. One of the most interesting comments you made was that nuclear power plants seem to be the only way to deal with weapon uranium, with nuclear weapon warheads. Of course, that makes sense. I just never thought of it.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, one of the common things that they do is they dilute the weapons material so that it can't be used to explode. But you still have the atoms, all the U-235 or plutonium-239 atoms are still there. Now you have a more expensive process of trying to separate them out. It's like this thing that what's his name? Arjun Makhijani, who works with Helen Caldicott. And one of their favorite things is to say that every nuclear power plant, its fuel, is typical, big nuclear plant like Diablo Canyon. Its fuel assemblies contain enough plutonium for 30 bombs. Well, okay, the fuel, when it comes out for storage, used fuel, it's got about 1% plutonium in it. That's okay. You could separate that out chemically. You could take these 100 tons of radioactive, fuel rods, fuel assemblies, and separate out the plutonium chemically in a very expensive place, radiation protected and all of the operations and so forth. So you could separate it out. What would you have? You'd have plutonium 239, 240, 241. 240 is considered by the International Atomic Energy Agency as protective in the sense that if you have a mixture of 239, 240, and maybe 241, the 240 fissions by itself unpredictably. You don't need to hit it with a neutron to fission, which is what we need in a regular nuclear plant. We need the neutrons. Without the neutrons, the nuclear plant doesn't do anything. But plutonium-240 will do something on its own. So if you're trying to build a bomb with the plutonium that you've separated out from 100 tons of nuclear power plant fuel, used fuel, you might be in for a bad surprise because you don't know when that 240 is going to start fissioning, and that will start all the rest of them fissioning too. There you go. So that's one part of it. It's kind of self-protective. In other words, the International Atomic Energy Agency indicates some what are called self-protective standards for nuclear materials. And a mixture of 240, 239, has a certain percentage. I think it's about 7%. 240 is considered to be self-protective because you're not going to be able to make anything out of it without blowing yourself up anyway. Similar is true for uranium-233 and a content of 230, uranium-230. But at any rate, even if you could do that, you're not going to get 30 bombs out of that without having another mechanism for separating isotopes. You've got to separate out the 240 to make a bomb, because a bomb has to be something that stays stable until you ignite it, until you set it off. So you got to get the 240 out, most of it. So how are you going to do that? And they're the same element. 239, 240, 241 are all the same plutonium. You can't do it chemically. So now you have to have something like a accelerator or some big machine that will, like we do with centrifuges for uranium. You could centrifuge it. But again, you're going to have to do it very carefully because you don't want the 240 to cause something to go off. It's things like this that are really unethical. I mean, for Caldecott to write books and go around making money, giving speeches, and for Makajani to do similar. We have a video of him giving testimony to this effect, this 30 bombs per nuclear plant used fuel trick in Congress. Fortunately, the congresswoman who was questioning him knew the facts, and he was trying to cover up the fact that, well, how are you going to deal with things like 240 if you're trying to make a bomb? And he had to kind of smiling, smirky, response to her questions, well, okay, yeah, you're probably right. We can't make 30 bombs. But this is what goes on. I mean, there's so many people making money off being anti-nuclear these days that, And meanwhile, the World Bank is saying it's the only way you're going to be able to meet IPCC standards. So you better get going. And the Chinese, the Russians, South Koreans are busy. So what are we doing? So what we are doing, though, at least with the terrestrial energy small modular molten salt reactor in Canada, they're in Toronto. They're in design certification now with the Canadian nuclear regulator. And fortunately, our own NRC has had the smarts to say, oh, well, we'll work with them too. So NRC is cooperating with the Canadian regulator relative to terrestrial energies design certification. And that's good. That's what we should be doing. We should have been doing that for a long time. Because, we're not getting anywhere. And President Kennedy's worry about national security and economic security are still there. I mean, we've done nothing really significant. We with another group of I work with, we've calculated what needs to be done to make the environmental targets from IPCC and so forth meaningful. And what is necessary is that the world have the equivalent of 20,000, that means 10,000 equivalents of Diablo Canyon. We need 10,000 Diablo Canyons as soon as possible. We were supposed to be on track to do a gigawatt per week, a gigawatt of clean nuclear energy per week by 1980. So that gives you an idea of how far behind we are. By 1980, well, we need 20,000 Diablo Canyon, or 10,000 Diablo Canyon. And that doesn't even address some of the other things that you need nuclear power for. So at any rate, so that's where we are. And hopefully our new administration will start wising up to what's going on, what's needed. I think Arun Majumdar. I know the one fellow, Arun Majumdar, who's been posited as somebody who's going to be high up in the energy department, in the new energy department. That would be good because he is pro-nuclear, but also he's been kind of chained to the Stanford way of looking at things, which has disappointed me for many years, which is under the influence of people like Precourt, oil and gas, and Chevron and so forth. Stanford engineering has unfortunately gotten co-opted by donations from the combustion industry because they didn't get rid of their investments years ago when other universities and organizations divested. They didn't. Stanford did not divest. So they've got unfortunate connections that are still dependent on the combustion industry. So,
Okay, I don't see any other questions or anything, and we're well after time. It's past 1:30, which is much longer than we usually go. So unless somebody has a question, we can probably wrap this thing up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cannara.
You're welcome.
It was really informative.
Well, I'm glad we almost made it in the time limit. But I encourage you to look at the slides that Paul Achoni from Canada did on future designs, and I'll send that to you.
Okay.
Sounds
I'm
good.
going to take off. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.